Welcome everybody to Monday Night Live. My name's Derek Arden and it's a great pleasure to have you here, either live, watching it on YouTube or on the Negotiators podcast. Please join us live if you can. Tonight we have a fascinating subject from David Skinner, psychological safety. Teams are very important. Team working is very important. And I've always said team stands for together, everyone gets more. I think I got that slightly wrong, but we never mind about that. Now, let me tell you about David. I've known David since 1990, but his working life started well before that. I'm not sure people need to know that. We don't need to know how old you are, David. You look pretty young in that picture. So let's...
I started when I was 12.
Yeah, exactly. David's been a faculty member of the Leadership Trust for over 25 years and a parallel business in a parallel career in business and finance. He also has a master's level qualification in coaching and mentoring. Ever since I've met him, he's always been interested in what makes teams effective and less effective. He describes his working life as 40 years of a training course. That's an interesting way of doing it. We meet up often and we talk about psychological issues. We talk about team working. And we usually disagree, which is always healthy because you want someone with a positive attitude in your team, in your mentoring group, in your mastermind group, who think differently but have a positive attitude. So David, over to you. You can share your screen now. And thanks very much for joining us.
Just to get the screen up. Well, thanks very much, Derek, for the introduction, and thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here. Yes, 40-year crash course, particularly in observing and being part of teams. I mean, I've had the great good fortune to be in some absolutely fantastic teams, and with the leadership training, I've been involved in observing teams that really take off, perform, and some that don't. And when you see the teams that do perform, it's inspirational. Some teams are so resilient, and it doesn't matter what you throw at them, they coalesce around the problem, they respond to it, and they deal with it. They organize themselves without intervention, and they've got a momentum of all of their own, so they appear unstoppable. And yet they sit sort of on a continuous spectrum. At one end, you've got teams that just dissolve into chaos. They shout all over each other. They just have no organization. They achieve very little. And at the other extreme, you have ones that are just go into complete rigidity. They get stuck with a plan, stuck with a hierarchy, and that's not a creative or learning environment. The minute the environment changes, they don't know what to do. But somewhere in the middle, there's this magical state where they really perform on their own to well beyond the combination of the team members. And since I stopped working full time, I've had the luxury of being able to try and join the dots from different disciplines. So there's brain physiology, psychology, coaching, but also complex systems and network theory, because after all, a team is really just a network of individuals with connections to each other and connections to the outside world. And that's led me to think of team performance as being the sum total of 6 different factors, of which psychological safety is a critical one. But before we dig into that, I'll just try and put that into a little bit of context, and then drill deeper onto psychological safety. I've put psychological safety at the top here, not because it's most important, but because it's the subject of this talk. They're equally important, and each you can't do without any of them, in my mind. But first, there's approach, not avoidance. And there are 2 alternative mindsets a team can have or an individual can have. You can be focused on moving towards a goal or away from it. So you can go to a party and your objective might be not to make a fool of yourself, or it might be to meet interesting people. That's an example of an avoidance or an approach goal. But that's a fundamental difference in mindset. It influences collective behavior as well as the chemistry in the brains of the individuals involved. So that's a key factor. Diversity is pretty critical. It's not about gender or race. It's which are the things that an observer sees from the outside, although there is some linkage. It's about what's going on inside, how people solve problems, the different experiences they bring to a problem, their culture, their beliefs. If you've got the top 5 performers in the world attacking a problem, chances are they probably get stuck in the same place because they all perform to very similar ways. But if you had somebody else who had a different approach, they'd help the top team get unstuck. And it's that diversity of ideas that really gives a team resilience and creativity, as Derek and I show when we're in the pub. Integrating emotion and thinking, I mean, that's a critical factor. I get sick of reading stuff that either tells you that your thinking brain needs to control the emotional behavior, or the emotional behavior is taking over the rest of the body and the brain, you're taking over the behavior. The two need to integrate, and the really best performing teams have the two supporting each other and working together. And when you get that happening, then the team begins to motor. Moderate stress speaks for itself. Too much stress is damaging, but not enough stress, and you don't get anywhere. When is stress too much? When it goes beyond what you think the capabilities are. And the high-performing team will expand the boundaries of that so they can perform for more and more complex tasks and still perceive the stress to be moderate. And that affects the brain chemistry in the brain, that affects the way you learn and behave. And finally, consistency, which is a slightly more technical point, but effectively it's saying that all the factors involved in the individuals and the team and its environment need to be aligned. That's about objectives and motivations, but also about culture, beliefs. They need to be aligned within an individual. They need to be aligned between individuals, and also between the team and the organization. If you get all those 6 working in that sweet spot between chaos and rigidity, then the team begins to perform on its own. And for me, the leader's point in function for the team is to actually continuously monitor and manage all these 6 factors, so that allows the team to then perform on its own. So that's a quick overview of where psychological safety sits as a core plank. So getting into psychological safety, I thought you might like to have a quick look at these pictures. 3 of them reflect situations where there hasn't been psychological safety, and 1 reflects a situation where there has been psychological safety. I wonder if you just like to have a quick look at them and put into the chat box which one you think is the odd one out.
Okay, while you're doing that, we'll just talk you through it. That was the Columbia space shuttle. That was the tsunami in Japan, I think, David. One was a BA air crash at Heathrow, and the other one was the Grenfell Tower fire. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Good. Much. Yeah, we've got airliner, we've got Challenger so far. Challenger, not Columbia. Okay,
it was Columbia. It's Columbia.
I knew my American.
That is Columbia.
Yeah. Fukushima Daiichi.
Alex says the airplane. Come on, have a vote. You can only be wrong. John
it's a safe environment.
People are going for the airplane. Grenfell fire, or even air place. I don't know what air place means, but we'll take that one anyway. Airplane's beginning to get it, David.
Yeah, good. That just shows what a high caliber audience you have on this show.
Yeah, well, John Baker can't type. He says, well, you know, he's in Swanage. That explains it.
Yes, you're correct. The one on the bottom left is BA flight 030, which 2 minutes out from landing lost all power to its engines and was heading for a busy dual carriageway and residential area. And because of the actions of the crew, they managed to crash land on the airport and no one died. For the other 3, the information that would have prevented the problems, the accidents and the deaths was available in the organizations and was aired. Either it wasn't aired fearlessly enough, or it wasn't listened to with sufficient respect, and the consequences were pretty drastic. So at its extreme, that suggests to me that psychological safety really does matter, although we hopefully don't actually have to experience it on that scale. So what is psychological safety? It's not a new idea. Warren Bennis talked about it and wrote about it in the 1960s. Amy Edmondson at Harvard started researching it in the 1990s and wrote about it in her most recent book, The Fearless Organization, which is relatively recent. And much of the content in this talk is based around what she says in her book. The background of a slightly worried-looking medical person is a nod to the core of her research, or the start of her research, where she was trying to look at the variances in patient outcomes across different groups in the hospital and work out what the drivers for that were. And the thesis was that the ones that made the more mistakes were probably the ones that had the poorer outcomes, whether they could pinpoint how that arose. Well, they were correct in that there was a linkage, but it was the opposite of what they expected. In the groups that had the best patient outcomes also reported most mistakes. And that then kicked off 20 years of work around psychological safety. And she introduces it with a story of a nurse in a neonatal ward with premature babies who's just been on a best practice course for dealing with lung development in babies and the drug regimes that support that. And she's with a doctor who doesn't appear to be considering this. So she steps up to him and is about to suggest this idea, but catches herself before she does. She'd seen him chastise another nurse publicly for doubting his judgment the previous week. So she thought it's probably better not to say anything. He's probably thought about it and decided it's not right. If she'd been in a psychologically safe environment, she wouldn't have felt that hesitation. She'd have expected people to want her to raise the idea. Might be right, might be wrong. But if you don't raise it, you don't get the chance to have it considered. And that's the contrast between psychological safety and lack of it. You're psychologically safe if you believe the context is safe for taking interpersonal risks. You feel comfortable to share concerns, talk about mistakes without fear of embarrassment. You're confident you can speak up without being humiliated or blamed, and people trust and respect their colleagues. And where does this come from? Well, when we're toddlers, we begin to realize that what other people think of us matters. And we develop our own strategies to regulate that. So if our parents tell us off for making mistakes, then we probably start to realize we don't want to do things where we might risk making mistakes. Or if we're told off for asking too many questions, we might decide that's a better strategy is not to ask as many. So we learn to regulate our environment, and this carries forward into our life all the time. No one wants to look ignorant, incompetent, or disruptive, so don't ask questions. Don't admit to mistakes, don't make suggestions, and then you're having a safe environment. Some misconceptions about psychological safety. It's not about being nice to each other. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's about candor, free exchange of ideas without risk, disagreeing with people when you don't think they're right. If you're not sure about something, saying so. It's more likely to be a bit of conflict rather than freedom from conflict. It's not a personality factor. So the argument, oh, well, people who are shy and introverted won't speak up at meetings, so that's what it's about, it doesn't really apply. I mean, if you're an extrovert, you're just as concerned about psychological safety. Might appear in different ways. So you may not want to make a fool of yourself in front of your boss. You may not want to do something which threatens your achievement of your targets, but psychological safety affects all personalities in that way. And it's not about lowering performance standards. So it's not about saying, well, let's make it all safe by trying to achieve a bit less. If you look at performance standards and psychological safety work together, but they're independent. So if you consider four different boxes here, on the bottom left, you've got a low psychological safety with undemanding goals. It's a pretty horrible environment to work in. You'll come to work, but your mind will be somewhere else. Self-protection will always win over any sort of discretionary effort. And you probably won't be very nice to each other. If you've got undemanding goals, but it's very safe, what a great place to work that is. There's open and collegiate, but not very demanding. No reason to seek more challenge. No reason to be creative or innovative. And you don't get any new ideas. It's not a learning environment. If you move across to the right-hand side where you have demanding goals and the low psychological safety, that's characterized here with anxiety. People work hard to avoid unpleasant consequences. But the way they do that is by activating their threat defense systems. So they're going to divert their resources to managing that personal threat to them. And that's going to inhibit their ability to learn and cooperate. It's going to impair their analytical thinking and their creativity. So that's not a great place if you want a resilient business. The place you want to be is with high safety and demanding goals. And when you have that, you have a learning and performance environment, you have a resilient business, which can get through problems and issues that aren't anticipated. So why does it matter? A few more pictures there that if you're inclined to, you can look in Amy's book and you'll find out what they're all about. But if we take it away from disasters and into business, here's 3 examples that she talks about. One is Wells Fargo, which had a fantastic reputation in the 1990s, 2000s for cross-selling to its customers. The average number of product sales per customer in the industry was 2. They were achieving 6, and they were targeting 8. The program was called Going for Great. And it was in a very, very demanding environment where people were either reprimanded or fired if they didn't achieve the targets. And funnily enough, when they audited it, they found they'd sold 2 million false products under false pretenses. People were opening credit cards for people who didn't want them, inventing email addresses so they could sign them up for online banking. And that had huge reputational damage to Wells Fargo. VW, you're probably all aware of their Dieselgate, where they had some very clever software that evaded the emission testing regime to make them look better than they actually were on the road. I won't go into the detail, but that was driven by Californian emission standard initially. And the engineers pretty much realized that they weren't going to be able to achieve them. But they worked in an environment of fear, which really didn't enable that, as that wasn't an option. So they came up with the alternative, which is fiddle the software. And the result of that, I Googled it last week, was VW lost 42.5 billion in valuation over 2 months. And they're estimated to have had to pay $33 billion in fines as a result. And you think, how on earth could that happen? It's so obviously not the case. Well, if you imagine the environment that their chief executive and chairman created, there's a quote on the next page, which I'll just come on to, and he was asked, how come you create such great body designs for Golfs? And he was very proud of it, and he boasted. He said, I bring everybody into my room who's involved, the design engineers, the body fitters, the marketing people, the product people, and this is what I say to them. I'm tired of all these lousy body fits. You have 6 weeks to achieve world-class body fits. If we don't have good body fits in 6 weeks, I will replace all of you. Thank you for your time today. And that's the environment of lack of safety that creates a $42.5 billion loss in value. Now, you can say, well, that's a one-off. Well, Wells Fargo and Nokia, which I didn't talk about, had similar environments and had similar issues. But on a small basis, small and modest way, I can think of my morning meetings when I was working in banking. And at the beginning of the year, when everyone was negotiating their budgets and their targets for the year, one time he came in and he said, look, I'm having a real pushback for our targets. We've got ambitious goals for the business. And if you don't share our vision, then you really need to consider whether you're working in the right organization. Now, I took that as an indication that it wasn't a particularly safe environment to discuss the topic with him. In a safe environment, it might have been, and I might have said to him, well, actually, I think you're going to be threatening the customer loyalty that we have, and actually this could damage the business long term. We might have had a discussion about it, and yes, I may not have shared the same vision, but he'd have known what the business was thinking. Probably he had no idea what people were thinking, because they all realized that if they didn't agree with him, they weren't sharing his vision and they better find somewhere else to work. And so it's not that uncommon. So in a silent organization,
just coming in with a couple of questions and just asking people to put any short, sharp questions in the chat box for you. This is great so far. Thank you very much. I can think of a number of cases. The Costa Concordia, that ship that sank off the rocks outside of Venice when 17 officials were on the bridge, but still the captain went ahead and did it. No one spoke up. The plane that landed in the Potomac River. And then I was just thinking of a couple of cases of fraud we've talked about. The Theranos case, where if you argue with Elizabeth Holmes, you ended up being fired almost immediately and sued by that David Boise, the famous aggressive New York lawyer. So I think this is everywhere. But the question I wanted to ask you was, how many psychological safe environments do you think they are? I know you and Jerry teach this at the Leadership Trust, and it's great, but how many realistically are there?
Well, my perspective is that it's pretty rare that you sit in that sweet spot where you've got all 6 of those factors working together. And psychological safety is key for that. And it's driven by some of the other aspects being right as well. They're all interconnected. But when you get that sweet spot, I think it's very, very rare. I can think of a rowing it I was in, and probably about once or twice, you suddenly get everything absolutely snapping. And it's just almost a mystical, experience. When I'm at a leadership trust, we're throwing things at people all over the place that they're not expecting. And once every few years, there's one team, they just cream the whole thing. They are absolutely on it. So it's pretty rare. You need to have that approach tendency. You need to be able to talk about how you feel and what you think at the same time. You need to have everybody aligned with the same motivations. And all that creates that sense of safety and trust that you need. So they all feed off each other. The short answer is very, very rarely.
Mm. You see it in sports teams sometimes, don't you, when they punch above their weight, but it doesn't seem to last for very long.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jurgen Klopp does a good job for Liverpool. He's not an easy guy to work with. I have no doubt. I mean, the train pushes this guy really hard, but there does seem to be that sense of relationship that works well. More often than sports teams, you see the soccer manager who yells at his players because they're not delivering. I mean, that's the archetypal UK soccer manager. So when it's really important, he yells more. And yet, when you're on the pitch in that cup final and your captain gets injured in the fifth minute, and you've got another 85 minutes to run again when you're not the favourites, that's when psychological safety really comes to its fore, when people are prepared to really work and trust each other, which is pretty much what happened in the BA 030 crash, where they all instantly worked together in a time of crisis, without thought, without pretense, without all the fluff that you might otherwise have in an unsafe environment.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for that. I think you're right about Jurgen Klopp. It'll be interesting to see what happens next year when he's lost his 2 best players. We'll see if he's really on the pace then. That
would be a good test.
A really good test. Okay.
Thinking about behaviour, do you want me to have you got any more questions?
Oh, keep going. That would be great. And I'll be checking the chat box. So that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. If you're in a silent organisation where people don't express their voice, I would bet all of you have experienced at least one of these things. It's not exhaustive, but it's just a few things that you might see. I have certainly been in positions where I have been afraid to speak up unless I'm completely backed up with solid data. People are looking at turnover projections for a client in an M&A deal, and you just don't believe them. But you're not going to say anything unless you really have a good argument to back yourself up. Don't speak up in a group with anything negative. I've been in an organization where bad news is not something that exists. Somebody comes up to you in the elevator and says, "Oh, how's things going?" Fantastic. How's that client pitch moving on? It's absolutely great. We're all working well together. Doesn't matter what the truth of things is. And then obviously speaking up may have career consequences if you don't share the vision of the business. So I'm sure many of you can identify with that and come up with an arm length of other things that you've experienced. So One of the things I've learned from this, which I'd never thought of it in this way, is to embrace mistakes. Mistakes are the data points that a leader needs to support the learning and growth, to support the achievement of their objectives. If you don't have mistakes, you don't know what you need to do better. And that was the learning from Amy Edmondson's study in the hospitals. The people who reported the most mistakes were the ones who did best, had the best patient outcomes. Now, how you get there is a topic probably of another discussion, which we could cover at a later date. But that to me is a key point. Gaps between results and plans, similar theme here. It's not evidence of underperformance. It may be, but that's not your start point. There's data to analyze. What is this telling me is going on? What should I be worrying about? What can I do to fix it? If you don't have that approach, you've got low psychological safety. You're like the emperor's new clothes. You've got an illusion of success. You think everything is going fine because nobody's telling you about the problems. And that's what happened with Wells Fargo and with VW. If you do get early information about shortcomings, then you can manage the size and impact of future problems. So, final point, psychological safety matters. People are happier, they make more effort. If you want to unlock discretionary effort, create a safe environment, people work better together, and they anticipate and adapt to change better. And for the businesses, they become more resilient, more creative, and fundamentally, they last longer. So that's the key takeaways. I did have some more slides, which just couldn't possibly fit in the time, which is, so what? What do you do about it? And that's a whole separate thing, which is non-trivial. But this sort of sets out the tone of, well, what would you like to, where do you want to get to in terms of how you are as a business? So with that, I'll leave it there for you, Derek, to open to the floor and discussion.
Fantastic, David. Thanks very much. If you could stop sharing your screen, we will give you the usual round of applause. Let me just put it on the gallery view for everybody. A lot of hard work there went into that. Thank you very much. David and I had 3 chats about it first, which was fantastic. Right, we've got a few minutes, so let's go to the chat box. Alex says, is it possible to design business processes which help increase psychological safety?
It was a statement. It is possible.
Oh, it is possible. Well, there you go, Alex. You've got a bad MC tonight, but there we are. Okay. I'm sure it is.
I'll give you some examples if we have time later.
Okay, thank you. Godfrey wants to mention the England test team, same individuals, change of manager and captain, change of approach. Beat the world champions 3-0. It's very interesting. That's why sports teams sometimes change a pretty good manager, because he seems to have lost the dressing room. Christine says, have you read Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, how best decisions are made by diverse groups? And Tim, of course, says mistakes are the footlights to success. And that was Thomas Edison's quote, wasn't it? I found 1,000 ways not to invent the light bulb, and he continued to be hugely successful. With that, I'm going to close the recording. Thank you a lot. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to, I think we've got Alison, the physio, on, haven't we, Alison? Yes, you're there. It's not stuck on a level crossing, or perhaps you are. Alison, thanks for joining us. And perhaps you could give us a few tips on what's happening in your clinic. But I've got terrible Tech's neck at the moment. I think that's the word. It's aching like mad. So why don't you start with Tech's neck and the problems people are having from computers and working from home?
Okay, well, hello everybody from sunny Cornwall. Well, I think you've heard me say before that it's all about the way we sit when we're doing things. You know, when you get involved in something, what happens? Your shoulders come forward, your head goes forward, and all these muscles up through here get tighter. So it's all about getting your shoulders back and down, trying to get the gap between your ears and your shoulders, and really taking a minute just to think of how you're sitting. It's hard when you're involved in creating a document or speaking to somebody. You get involved and you don't think about your body, but actually if you do that all day, then it's not going to help, because your muscles are going to get tighter and tighter. And if back to the points we've been talking about, if you're in an environment where you don't feel safe, you're not going to have a very open body language. Your body language is probably going to be much more closed down, because if you're not sure how you're going to be received, or if you're going to be in trouble or whatever, you're not really going to be sitting up there, sitting in a good posture. So it's not difficult. It's just a question of thinking about how you're sitting. Maybe, look online for some positioning stuff about how you should have your desk and your screen, but basically look straight at your screen. Don't look down all the time, and don't hunch your shoulders. So, I mean, it's that old-fashioned thing of sit up properly, I guess. But it works. It really works. So.
Should we have a desk that goes up and down, a stand-up desk, one that goes up and down, adjusting the seats? It sounds like we should, but that's all money.
Money. they're not cheap or easy to fit in necessarily. Yeah, they're great, but even standing all day is not necessarily great, because you get tired and you're going to end up slumping forward. It's more about changing your position and checking your position. But I guess if you did have an up and down desk, you could do that. That's true.
I was holding my camera up like this the other day. Well, not camera, my phone, because I was trying to read my messages like that, because my neck was aching like mad, and someone thought I was videoing them. But it's very difficult, isn't it?
It is quite difficult. It is quite difficult, but you've just got to keep on doing it. It doesn't make a difference. You should know this, Derek. You're supposed to do these exercises every day.
Yeah, I know. I didn't bring you on here to be nagged, did I, Alison? As usual. But yeah, no, okay. And what else are you noticing at the clinic at the moment? Is there a lot of people stressed?
There's a lot of people stressed. Yes, there's a lot of uncertainty, isn't there, in the world at the moment, with what's going on in Ukraine and with financial problems and things like that. So I think people are more stressed, and I'm seeing a lot more headaches coming in, and neck problems, back problems, which I think are down to being very tense and not taking the time to look after themselves. So it's all about getting a bit of treatment and doing the exercises and watching your posture.
How often should people get up and have a walk round and stretch their backs out when they're on Zoom?
Well, if you're in an absolute ideal world, which I don't think is ever going to happen, it's about every 30 minutes, but I guess once an hour, if you can manage it. I mean, I don't sit down for longer than half an hour, but I guess in my job, I'm up and about moving, doing things anyway, so it's a bit different. But every hour definitely makes a difference. And your concentration will be better too, because when you're sitting all closed down, you don't breathe properly, and so you don't get as much oxygen, and therefore you get a bit of brain fog and you can't concentrate as well. So movement really helps.
This is really becoming an increasing issue, isn't it, particularly with laptops and smartphones?
Yes, absolutely, because they're not. If the old-fashioned PC, it was easier to set up, wasn't it, and have a good setup. But when you're on the move, or when you're just working from home from your laptop, it's harder. And the phone is the worst of all, I think, because it's small and you're having to look down at it to actually see what it's saying or what you're looking at. So yes, okay. It's not a problem that's going away, but it is something that you can deal with if you take a little bit of time. So.
Sure. Oh, okay. Jill English, she says she loves the Alexander technique, semi-supine position. I've no idea what that is.
Well, that's lying down flat on the floor and aligning your body. It takes a bit of time, and you have to know what you're doing. So, I just caught something in the chat box about somebody's Apple Watch. I think Apple Watches actually remind you to move, don't they? So that's a really good built-in bit of technology there. So
I set mine for 17 minutes. I got a 17-minute rule. I try and move after 17 minutes or change what I'm doing. That speeds me up as well.
Excellent. So,
slowing down wouldn't be any good for me, Alison, though, would it? And a lot of people on here who are sort of alpha and are trying to go for it all the time and forget we're a bit older than we thought we were.
Never.
Okay. Any questions for Alison in the chat box? I'm going to close the recording now. Again, a round of applause for David Skinner, please. Psychological safety. A round of applause for Alison, the physio from the Woking Sports Clinic. And thanks for joining us on Monday Night Live, and look forward to seeing you next week, when I've got all the way from Australia, Winston Marsh, the former president of the National Speaking Association Australia, and I've persuaded him to get up at 1:45 in the morning Melbourne time to be on with us live. So that's a real negotiation that I've done on your behalf. He's a marketing guru, absolute expert, great ideas, man. So we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, David, again, and thank you, Alison.